I just felt the Holy Spirit said to me, they will always long for their mum, and you will be there. And it's going to hurt. When they get married, when they graduate school, like, they'll long for her. They are her, and they'll want her to be here, and she won't be, and there will be joy and there will be grief, always.
This is Family Life Blended, and I'm Ron Deal. This donor-supported podcast helps blended families and those who love them pursue the relationships that matter most. I'm so glad you've joined us in this journey. Welcome to episode number 68, Preparing to Blend, Getting Ready for Life After the Wedding. Hey, we've got a new feature I want to tell you about. If you have a topic, a subject you would like for us to address on a future podcast, you could now submit that to us. Just email it, blendedquestions@familylife.com. That's the address you want to send this to, blendedquestions@familylife.com. We want to know what you're thinking about, what you're wrestling with, so go ahead, speak up. Let us know what's on your mind and your heart. By the way, you can get that email address anytime in the show notes. Speaking of hearing from you, Sonia wrote us. She was looking for some things to know before blending, she said. Well, Sonia, you may remember back in September that we announced the release of my newest book, Preparing to Blend, The Couple's Guide to Becoming a Smart Stepfamily. That resource, which is, by the way, number 15 in our Smart Stepfamily series, it's designed for engaged couples who are forming stepfamilies, and it's also for ministry leaders who want to provide good premarital training to couples. It's a full-fledged premarital preparation program inside this book. Well, today, Sonia, you're going to hear from two couples who read the manuscript and did some of the growing activities that are found inside that book. What did they learn? What was helpful? And how did it change the course of their engagement? That's what we're going to be talking about. So if you're listening right now and you're dating or engaged, obviously this podcast is going to speak directly to you. But if you're already married, I think the podcast will still give you some perspective on the journey your family has been on and maybe what you can still do about it today. And if you're listening and you know anybody who does premarital counseling, like I just said, please share this podcast episode with them. Did you know that 75% of pre-blended family couples don't get any premarital preparation? The only way to change that is to educate the leaders who provide that sort of service to them. You can help us reach them by just sharing this episode. Now, one more thing before we get started. We've created a webpage with some bonus material for both engaged couples and leaders. And just one of the free things that you find there is the introduction and the entire first chapter of the book, Preparing to Blend. It's a downloadable PDF. So go ahead and take the book for a test drive. I'll let you know more about this opportunity later. The show notes will link you to the page. Okay, here's our conversation about preparing to blend. Okay, guys, thanks for being with me. First of all, let me just say congratulations on engagement and your plans to get married. It's good to have you here. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Glad to be with you.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, so, Jamie and Marion, now, I know you guys are actually already married at this point, right? You've been married about a month, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Married about a month.
Congratulations.
Congratulations. So, but you weren't married when you went through the manuscript. So we're going to kind of, hear from you guys here in just a minute about all of that. Jonathan and Peta, you guys are not yet married, and you're in the throes of it, aren't you?
Mm-hmm.
Plans, details. Sometimes that's the best part, and sometimes that's the worst part of a wedding, right?
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun working together. And then also, COVID's kind of complicated things, and it's been an interesting journey, but we're having fun.
Yeah, Good. Peta, let me just ask you something. Make sure I got this right. You were married and divorced, and you're not bringing any biological children to this relationship, right?
Yeah, that's right. Spot on.
And Jonathan, you were married and had 4 girls with your wife, Winter. How much time passed from the moment you got word that something was going on till she died?
I mean, she was pronounced at the hospital within less than an hour, and
Okay.
It took the ambulance 20 minutes or so to get there, and I thought without a miracle she was gone, and so yeah, it was really, really fast.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let me just ask you guys a really hard question as we launch into the conversation. There's a lot of details to the backstory of your lives and how you became single in the first place and then found each other. So let me just ask a difficult question. Thinking about all of that, how has that past and that loss rippled into your present? And I know there's a lot in that, but just kind of high level in general, how has that story of loss influenced you coming together, deciding to get married, and then deciding to be a family?
I'll let you jump first. He's better at starting things.
I don't know. I mean, there's been so much to it. We really met on Zoom our first date, and I wouldn't even consider it a date yet. But in that, I shared my story, she shared hers. And I would call them two pretty big stories, two very different stories, but ultimately...
it's hard when you're meeting somebody at 40. We had both just turned 40 when we were introduced. And I remember thinking, you don't know... You don't want to say everything up front and be like, well, this. But at the same time, you're in a demographic where you don't necessarily want to muck around.
Yes.
And if somebody can't hold space for the bigness of your story or the bigness of your loss and what that means for the girls and all of that sort of thing, you kind of want to get to it pretty quickly.
Yeah. And I would say the beauty of how we came in together is we both kind of had full knowledge of each other's stories. And I think there has to be a willingness to carry that in a way for each other. And because we know that it's God, it doesn't feel like a burden for either of us to carry the thing, but we realize we're carrying a thing somewhat differently, a weighty thing. Yeah.
There's actually a quote that I wanted to share. We're also renovating a second master room in the current house, and we had talked about buying a new house and having a fresh start and, trying to come into this thing with newness. And I happened to be watching the master classes. So there was one on there by a woman named Kelly Wersler, who's a pretty well-known designer, interior designer. And she said this thing that for us, it not only felt like confirmation that we should renovate, but it just felt like it gave us language around, I guess, kind of what you're asking. She posited a couple of questions in the masterclass. How can an old soul be given a new spirit? And of course, she's talking about architecture and historical buildings. How can the two have a conversation in the new space, the old and the new? We want to embrace the past, but we also want to give our space a new spirit. You need to remember there's always going to be a dialogue going on between what's new coming into the space and what's already there, what's historic. So what do you want that conversation to be?
That is very much what I'm asking. The past is always a part and in conversation with. I really like the way she said that.
It's really beautiful. And obviously she was talking to architecture and she said this thing when you're going through your space, you want to look for architectural features, historic features that you love, that you're not only do we not want to change that, we want to repeat it somewhere else. We want to bring it forward. We want to be intentional about how we replicate the cornicing or that beautiful wooden door. So it just kind of gave us a mindset around not just how do we hold space for winter for the girls, but where else, her spirit or what the girls carry of her, or what other ways can we kind of not only hold space for what's already there, but actually create space to carry it forward and kind of include it in what we're going forward in. And I feel like for me, I was I'm one coming into your five. And there's a lot to learn there. We've used language sometimes it feels like, even though I'm 40 years old, I feel like I'm being adopted. And that's kind of language that I've used with the girls sometimes, because as much as I feel the discipline, the weight, and the importance and the conviction, really, to hold space for their mum and to bring that forward in ways that I can, I also want to challenge them or in a good way confront them with they also need to make space for me. Like if we're going to have family-ness, I love that word that you use in the book, which we've totally adopted into our vernacular, then we all have to kind of make room for each other. And I think early on it was kind of, I felt like I was drowning a little bit in trying to carry Winter with me.
Right.
And I didn't know her, and bringing her for the girls and making sure they didn't feel like I was a threat to their mom's space. And I think now, a year in,
it's good. And the thing for me is I had to let go of being probably the protector of the old and the historic and actually trust her that she's not trying to tear down, but to actually renovate, which actually includes a lot of new, but it doesn't destroy or take away all of the old. So the language that you gave us, which is also language I feel like our counselor was trying to encourage us in as well, especially me, and you start thinking about things that we have to deal with in terms of pictures and historic pieces in the home, just all that. It's a really complicated thing that we're really grateful that we've had a godsend of a few people like yourself and our counselor into our lives to give us language, but then also process for how do we do that well. So.
Peter, I have to say, I just love the imagery of the architecture, the old, the new, bringing forth the old spirit, the best of qualities, if you will, of the old spirit of the old architecture and bringing that in. That translates very well into the experience of becoming a blended family, is you bring those old relationships, those old connections, those old memories, the meaning of it all, in particular to children. That's really great. I want to ask Jamie and Marian a similar question, just as you guys have been listening to us. There's a couple of chapters in the book Preparing to Blend that are specifically about loss and about change and grieving. So I'm curious for you guys, a little bit different background story. Jamie, you were divorced with 2 kids when you met Marian, and Marian, you were divorced with 3 kids when you came together. So react to this conversation about the old spirit and bringing that forward, and to what degree does that fit, and to what degree does that maybe not fit for you guys?
I feel like because our situation's a little different, and it's funny because we didn't expect to purchase our home before getting married, but in the process, it just happened that we bought a house in between the planning and everything, but we kind of made it a point not to necessarily bring some of the things that we had from our previous relationship or marriage into our new home, which was more about being intentional about not bringing things from the past, from past marriage. But the situation, I guess, with you guys is different because there's been a loss, which not to say that between our boys, not having like their parents be together is not a loss. It is a loss as well.
Yeah, I think it is different after a divorce. And that's one of the distinctives I talk to leaders about who are bringing couples through the Preparing to Blend material is after a death of a parent, oftentimes spouses are sometimes looking for similar things in what the old family was or those experiences, especially if that was a good relationship and a good marriage, good family. Often they're looking for the same, and there's a lot to carry forward from that past family experience. Sometimes when there's been a divorce, it's not always the case, but sometimes when there's been a divorce, that's something you wanted to leave behind, or that's something that is best left there. And there's not as much you want to intentionally carry forward for yourself. The question is, how do you carry forward some things for children? So, Jamie, I'm curious, what are you thinking as you're listening to this conversation?
So one of the things that I'm thinking is there have been some things where we're like, okay, we'll keep this element of what you're doing in your household. Okay, we'll keep these things of what I'm doing in my household. And then also creating new as well. For example, with creating something new, Miriam's family really didn't do much around Christmas, and my family did stockings the whole 9 yards. But one thing that we did last year was we celebrated on the 26th because that's when we had the kids. And we had each of the kids draw a name out of the hat, and that was who bought for what. And so it created our own little tradition. But at the same time, we did keep elements of not making such a big deal out of it, but still recognizing the holiday.
Yeah, that's good. And every time you have a first, right, it's a bit of an experiment. And how are we going to do this first Christmas? How are we going to do this first birthday, first whatever? And sometimes you go, wow, that worked really, really well. And the word I always give people is, hey, if it goes well, keep doing it, but learn from it if it doesn't go well. It's okay. Pull back, kind of, ooh, that was a hiccup. Now what do we do? How do we regroup and go forward? Yeah, Jonathan, did you have a follow-up thought?
Yeah, I just wanted to share because I think there is a difference. I didn't necessarily choose, and everyone that gets divorced doesn't choose
That's
it either.
right.
I didn't necessarily choose to be where I was, but ultimately there is a process, I believe, because I've walked through it now, that has to happen in order for me to have oneness with PETA. So I think you carry things forward for the kids, but that has to be very different and distinct than carrying things forward for me. And in that, I have to just trust the Lord that if he was moving me on or moving Winter on, let's say, then what I was to accomplish with Winter when I gave my vows was accomplished, and I can move on. I think that was the hardest part of the process for me, while still holding things for my girls, which was also a confusing process, which I don't think is probably any different for someone that gets divorced. It's just a really difficult process to know the balance of that, So I just wanted to share. In that way, I think it's similar.
You're right. I think that's true. Toward the end of family-ness, so that's a couple-ness sort of a endeavor right there. How do the kids let go or move on or bring forward? That's a big discussion in the book Preparing to Blend, to just try to help people anticipate that for their children and with their children as they engage them even before the wedding takes place. Jamie, Marian, let's back up a little bit. When you guys first started dating, there's 5 kids between the two of you. How did they react?
It was kind of all over the place. Some of them it was easier, some of them was harder. I think I probably had one of the hardest times trying to balance giving my time to Marian and also still giving my time to the boys. And so I really felt like I was being pulled in 2 different directions, because Marian's here on one side telling me I'm not spending enough time with her, and then the boys are over on the other side feeling like I'm not spending enough time with them. And so I really felt like I couldn't win for losing in that situation.
Yeah, so what did you do with that? I mean, how did you try to work through that?
I don't have a good answer for you. I wish I did. It's really still trying to figure out the process. Even now that we're married, still trying to find a good balance. And some days I do a good job of it. Other days I don't, and somebody feels like they're not getting enough.
Yeah. And Jamie, man, I appreciate you saying that, because I think for most biological parents, that is a very common experience, something everybody can relate to. It's just wanting to do right by everybody. And so finding that balance, I think, is really difficult. And one of the things I always talk about is, especially during the transitions, when you're becoming a family, the first few years of becoming a step family, biological parents moving toward their children, even as they're moving toward their new spouse. That's the delicate balance we're talking about, but it does take movement in both directions, emotionally connecting with both kids and spouse. And yeah, there's some challenges there. I'm curious, Marian, did you sense his struggle to find the balance?
I knew that it was challenging for him, and he felt like, like, what can I do? And like he said, he's better, but I think that we both have very different schedules, work schedules, and activities with the kids that kind of hinder that space where we can have time together. And we just try to be intentional. Like this last weekend, we had, I think, no kids for a day or 2, and then all of the kids the next day. So for a few days, it's just, trying to balance. He has his kids every other week. I have my kids most of the time. And my oldest is between his dad and I. So we try to make it work. We've started using the Google Calendar, which has helped to kind of see what we have going on every day.
It's one of those learning moments where you got to figure out how to, make it work.
Yeah. So what our pastor, our marriage counselor, was telling us, me physically putting date night on the calendar shows Marian like, hey, your time is important to me. Here it is. I'm making time for you right here. And actually her being able to visualize that time is specifically being made for her.
And being felt made a priority. That's good. So 5 kids. Marion, when at this point, you guys being married, when you were going through your engagement, how old were the kids?
Well, we were engaged, last year? So they were 17, 15, and 4.
Good. So those are your 3 kids. And how about his 2? How old were they when you guys were engaged last year?
My boys were 12 and 14.
Yeah, so quite a spread, a lot going on in those preteen years for you guys. So this coupleness versus family-ness thing, I'd love for all 4 of you to just react to that. So the book clearly says coupleness does not equal family-ness. And the idea there is that when you find somebody you're romantically interested in and fall in love with this person, that's essentially forming a couple bond, a couple relationship. But becoming family is a different bond. It's a different combination of relationships. And just because you're in love with a person does not mean that you've become a family. For most people, starts to happen after the wedding takes place. But I'm just curious, when you first read that or saw that or heard that, how did that hit you? I'd love to hear from all 4 of you.
I mean, I think for me, I said this from the very beginning of our relationship, the thing that was most attractive to me about Peta was her desire for family-ness. In fact, like she felt like the Lord kind of told her that she was going to adopt kids when she got married. And so coming into it, she even started praying for the girls before she met the girls. And that was probably for me the most validating for me that I could take a risk on loving, you know? And it was a part of her vision. For us, I guess, for our relationship, it's made it, we do coupling really well. Like her and I together have lots of fun together. We play well together. Family-ness has been and continues to be a challenge in different ways, but it is the long-term vision, which for me has been just a validating thing for our relationship, which I don't know, maybe I'd say this, like for somebody that's thinking about blending, thinking about, proposing, like it's such a high value for her. It's been such an important thing for me. And probably specifically because my girls lost their mom, like to have somebody interested in me that's not interested in them was a very scary thought. Probably a leading thought, actually. So
yeah, I think for me, the greatest challenge has been what I feel in my spirit versus the reality of being in the house.
And when you say what you feel in your spirit, is that a fear that you have?
Well, I think I'm 100% like a glass half full optimist. I don't know how to say it. I don't know, who can relate to this, but we're obviously really deeply spiritual people. And 2 of the things that I think were really formative for us was one was the engagement and one came after the engagement. So when Jonathan proposed to me, he actually had to ask me 3 times because I ended up having this kind of moment when he first asked me where I felt really shocked. I didn't know he was going to ask me, but then immediately I felt like I saw, and for me, this is what I mean by in my spirit, I felt like I saw a series of images of each of the girls at pinnacle moments in their lives, getting married, graduating high school, all of these very formative pinnacle moments. And I felt this sense of myself kind of almost like a satellite, like there, but, a little bit still on the outside. And I just felt in my spirit, like the Holy Spirit said to me, they will always long for their mom and you will be there. And it's going to hurt. They'll always long for her when they get married, like when they graduate school.
Yes,
like
they will.
They'll long for her. They are her, and they'll want her to be here. And there will be joy and there will be grief always. And I just felt like in my spirit, the Lord said to me, if you're not willing to stand in that grief with them, then don't say yes, because it's going to be a lot. It's going to be for the rest of your life. Like you're going to be the one who is there when they long for their mom, and you've kind of been there, like doing the thing with them and spending the time with them and cooking the meals, and they'll be like, we want our mom. And it's going to hurt, and it's going to hurt everyone. Like, so that's what I mean by in my spirit. And then I said yes. I was like, I could do that.
Well, no, see, that's what is so beautiful about that, Peta, is that you saw a reality and you said, I choose yes. I think
Right.
so many people have the assumption that, well, because you and I say yes to each other, that the kids are not going to have those moments where they see me but wish and long for their mother. They're just going to be fine.
Right.
It's going to be, we've repaired it, we've fixed it, we've taken care of that hurt or pain
Right.
in their heart. But no, how much more special it is to see it for what it is and say yes to it. I think that's beautiful.
I mean, it's beautiful. And then there's also moments where I'm there
Yeah.
and I'm like, they don't see
Yes.
me and they want their mom. And it really does hurt. And that's what I mean by, for me, the biggest wrestle is like, in my spirit, I'm like, I can do this. I love them. I'm born for this. I'm made for this. I'm forged for this. For me, trying to figure out how to maintain sort of the integrity of the orbit of who I am as a woman, as an artist, as a being, spiritually, emotionally, physically. And physically to me is really important because I do kind of have a largeness around my personality. I'm like 5'10" almost, and I have a pretty big presence. And
The girls are like 4'11".
And so when I first came into the house, even my presence was very shocking to them. So it was just like, how do I figure out how to be in that space of holding space for their mom, being with them in their grief, but also being like, I have to be able to be myself here.
Right.
And that's a growing process. And I think now the girls think I'm strange and funny and like all those things. They're always like, Peter, what are you doing? Like, and I think that's a huge piece of it is culture. Like, that's why I said the thing before about there's 5 of you and there's 1 of me, is learning this whole, we have kingdom in common and that's it. Right? Like, and even quote unquote kingdom is like so diverse, so vast, so broad. Like, so that's kind of been a thing as I feel like at times I'm trying to learn a new language in some ways.
And that's exactly right. It's moving from, we talk on this program a lot about outsiders and insiders. Insiders are the people who are biologically connected to one another, and outsiders are people that are new. As you said, I'm a satellite. That's an outsider language. It's perfect illustration. But you could also say it's cross-cultural. I'm from another country. And Peta, you are from another country. You're from Australia, right? So it's sort of like, we're learning cross cultures, we're learning languages, we're learning new systems of how things work. And so there's this constant process of moving in to the other.
We didn't really go through it because we were I was in Canada working and we didn't have the opportunity to, but there was some language around what you're talking about in your book where you refer to the exercises where you draw the family map. I think I was coming upon some of this revelation about like, well, if I'm holding space for Winter and the girls, like the conversation Miriam and Jamie that you guys were touching on earlier about feeling torn, I was like, you've got to have my back and let go of Winter or I can't hold her for the girls.
Jonathan has to have your back.
Because I was sort of like, if you're holding Winter and making sure she's on it and not let go of, and I'm holding Winter for the girls and the girls are holding Winter, then no one's holding me. And that doesn't feel very safe. And we were kind of coming upon that. It was a real fire for both of us, I think. Jonathan referenced it earlier. And so we were coming upon this revelation of like, I was like, I don't feel like myself. I don't know how to be myself in, and all of these things. And then, we sent you a book and the family mapping thing, even though we didn't get to do the exercise because we were in separate countries, it helped me realize how little of myself I had brought to the table. Because it suddenly made me feel like, oh, the girls don't know anything about my family. Like I'm learning all this stuff. I'm meeting their grandparents. I'm meeting their aunts and uncles. I'm going to Texas and meeting their family, meeting Winter's family and, doing all these things to make sure that they feel like I want to learn everything about them that I can. And all of a sudden, I remember looking at the pages about family mapping and thinking, oh, that would be unacceptable. I could not sit down and talk about myself like that. The girls would not. It'd be too much for them. And so I think even though we didn't get to do the exercise, even that thought, made me realize how much I was holding back, how much I was, so it's just like language and realization, like they don't know about my parents or that I was born in Malaysia or that I have this huge community in
absolutely.
LA.
And that's great insight. Let me just tell our listener a little bit. What she's referencing there is in this book, Preparing to Blend, are some what I call growing activities that are designed to help you move from coupleness to familyness. even as you're moving towards the wedding. You don't have to wait to increase the momentum here, but you do have to be very intentional. So a chapter will spend some time talking about loss, like we've been talking about here, for example, or planning your wedding and how you can include the children. And then it will give you a very practical activity to do, to have a conversation and to begin to put words on some of these things and describe the dynamics and get to know each other in some way. And Peter was just referencing one of the chapters. You actually go online and create a digital map of your family and the relationships and the connections to people in other households. And you're able to put a temperature reading on those different relationships. Jamie, Marion, I'm curious, did you guys get to do the blended family map?
We did do the blended family map. For us, we realized just how vast it was because we're realizing, not only is it, us and our kids, but it's also, my parents and Miriam's parents, but not only just our parents, but then there's also each of our ex-spouses' parents as well. So it was pretty interesting when you really got to see, oh wow, this could just go on and on, because then just for example, Miriam's ex-husband's grandmother and an aunt are in town this week. And so we're trying to make sure that we get a chance to connect with them,
right.
For Miriam and for her kids. And so it's expansive when you look at it.
Marion, I'm wondering what insights maybe the family map brought to you.
For me, it was realizing how much more extensive it was for me, since I keep in touch with my ex-husband's family and I have a better relationship with them than my ex-husband does, and keeping our relationships going for my kids. So like Jamie was saying, like when his family comes to visit from Washington State, they usually stay and visit with me. And same thing, like when I go to Dallas to visit my family, I also make it a point to visit my kid's grandfather who lives there. So it's a little bit more work for me, but I do enjoy it. And I love that, they've decided to continue our relationship and they still keep me around.
Mm-hmm. Oh, no, and that's good, and that's important. Seeing all the characters, if you will, in your blended family story, I think is helpful for people, which is one reason we put that map in there. It just helps you think about that. I think it also can help you guys think about life from the perspective of somebody else. So, for example, let me ask you guys some questions. As you think about, so those of you that are going to be step-parents, right? That's Peter, that's Jamie, that's Marion. If you were to think about one of your stepchildren, and let's say I was talking to your oldest stepchild, okay? The one that's coming, the oldest one, whatever that is, however old that is. And I were to ask them, so what do you think about Miriam or Jamie coming into your life as your step-parent? And what do you think your mom or dad, whoever's that biological parent in the other home, what do you think they would say about Miriam or Jamie coming into your life?
Oh, it's not good. That's been very clear from the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Give me Luke's words. What do you think Luke would say?
Daddy doesn't like Jamie.
Okay, pretty straightforward. And so all of a sudden the map helps you have an insight into Luke's experience of life in his blended family between two homes. Daddy doesn't like Jamie. That helps you immediately go, you know what? When Luke is over at his dad's house, he's kind of got to present messages to his dad that he doesn't really like me a whole lot.
Yes, very much so.
Now, that kind of reality sometimes is hard to hear, and yet it's so important to see that from the child's perspective, because it now sensitizes you to who you are when you're with Luke. It helps you talk well about Luke's dad. It helps inform how you interact with Luke's dad if you ever meet up at the soccer field one day. You're all there cheering on Luke or whatever it is that Luke's involved in. How do you then respond? What do you do? What do you not do? I mean, all of those are important things to do, and the map just gives you some insight into that because you can step inside their shoes. So, Jonathan, Peter, how might that work in your situation?
The thing that's helped me support PETA through that process, which there's definitely thoughts that each of my girls have differently around what family-less looks like and how that expands. I think the general statement that could summarize it would be that it's not anything they've ever asked for. And so it's being, regardless of how you think they feel or how they should feel, it's being, in a way, it's being imposed on them. And so I think the responsible thing that we've tried to do is just understand that and sympathize with that. Peter's done an amazing job sympathizing with that general. And again, it's different we've got 4 different individuals,
Yeah, they're all
girls
really
in our home,
different.
very different.
Yes.
But in general, all 4 of them lost somebody from their family tree in a way, lost that person, and then gained a person, and neither of those circumstances they asked for. So I think just having sympathy and understanding for that. And for me, that's even been hard because, as an adult who thinks well about what I believe to be true about the fact that, God can reconcile and God can change. It doesn't really change their experience of somebody being removed from their family tree.
Their mom, no less.
Their mom, no less. And then somebody else being, quote unquote, a replacement to that.
Yes.
Obviously, Peter's not a replacement to that, nor would she ever try to be a replacement to that. But ultimately, that's what it feels like.
You both are aware that your experience as adults coming into this new marriage obviously is a gain for you, as we like to say, but it's a gain for the kids, but it's also bringing some sadness and loss with it. And so it's a mixed bag. And the fact that you're even aware of that puts you so far ahead. I think one of the biggest mistakes I see people make who are engaged couples forming stepfamilies is they just overlook that. They inadvertently blind to it, naive to it, whatever you want to say. They kind of go, oh, it's okay, they'll be fine. They'll get used to the new life and the new family. But in the process of stepping on their grief, you kind of make a statement to them inadvertently that says, your pain is not really important to me. It's not really an issue here. Like, get over it. And that just makes it even triple harder for them to deal with their loyalty and find a way to let you in. But when you're aware of it and you speak to it and you say, hey, I'm not trying to be your mom. She'll always be the special person in your heart. Those words resonate. They begin to settle that fear a little bit, that concern, and it's a huge win. Again, let me just say to the listener, one of the things we try to do in this book is to give you opportunities to push forward some of these messages and have these conversations in ways that maybe you wouldn't just naturally on your own. Would love to hear back from Jamie and Marion a little bit more. So there were other chapters in the book about planning your wedding and ideas around including the kids and what roles that they can play. There's things in there about parenting, what you're going to call each other after the wedding, how you would introduce each other in public, and what you will call or refer to each other even when you're walking around the same house together, stuff on merging money and anticipating the changes that are going to take place in your life, your schedule, and your daily routine. I'm curious, did any of those stick for you guys?
That was one of our biggest takeaway from the book was the thought hadn't even really crossed our mind about asking them to be part of the wedding or including them in the wedding. We just, we obviously had a discussion about our plans, and it was funny because I think my oldest one was, well, just go to the courthouse. Why do you have to spend money? And just things like that, don't overcomplicate it. Like, just get married, But we did include them. We had an outdoor wedding,
we used the sand ceremony that you had suggested in the text.
Okay.
Tried to, make sure they knew that they were, an important part of this marriage. And it wasn't just 2 people getting married, but 2 families getting married.
Good. And how'd that go over? I mean, did the kids kind of talk to you? Did you guys talk around how you were going to do that? And did they let you know how they wanted to be involved in the wedding?
We've got a house full of teenagers. Literally everybody except for Eli, who's 5, is
but he acts like he's a teenager.
He's 5 going on 15 though. But so they're like, That's fine. Whatever. Yeah. But they actually, they did get a say in,
The colors of their sand.
They picked the colors of the sand that they wanted, and
The flavors for the cupcakes and cannolis and desserts for the wedding.
They did pick out some of like the desserts and stuff for the wedding.
I just have come to believe that is so very important, that you give kids voice and let them find their right place. Again, to the listener, this does not mean you tell them what role they're going to play in the wedding. No, the whole point is you engage them, and the growing activity in the book walks you through this dialogue so that you listen more than you tell, and you find out what their interest is. And some of them may not want to be involved with it at all. They just may want to sit, and that's all they want to do. Okay, you honor that. But there may be others who want to be deeply involved and pick out colors and whatever it is. The point is you give them a role and a part in the process of becoming a family, even from day one. And listening and engaging and hearing, that's really the benefit here, even before the wedding takes place. The fact that you're moving toward them and listening, I think, is really, really special. Peter, Jonathan?
Yeah, I think up until that point, I think there was just a lot of, up until the point where Peter invited the girls to be bridesmaids and we invited them into the process of the wedding, I think both of us had real fear around encroaching on the way they'd want to experience. Instead of inviting them, we were kind of pushing back, not wanting to offend, not realizing that it would probably be more offensive to just not say anything. And so the book actually gave us language for, like, we read the chapter and sat down at the dinner table on, what was the title of the chapter?
The wedding. It was about planning your wedding.
Planning your wedding.
We sat down at the dinner table, and one of the girls asked a question about the wedding. And so we basically just jumped into the conversation with fresh information, like we were professionals, basically. But it was the beginning of us including them in the wedding in every way, and not just the wedding, but also in our home renovation and flooring that we're going to do, and not making it seem like we're making all these changes to our home, and that's also something being imposed on you, as opposed to something that you get to experience and be a part of and have choices in. So
And I think some of the language that you use in that chapter about how, because we've always talked about the wedding as a threshold moment, as this like before and after thing. And so I can't remember exactly what it was, but you use some language in the book about how that before and after can feel for the kids and how much that has to be walked back if it's not crossed over properly. And so I think for me, because I don't like confrontation, and I mean, who's not scared of rejection? Like, I don't want to be rejected by the girls. Like, I don't want to.
Hey, Peter, this reminds me, I got to ask you, I happen to know that on the next season of Supergirl on the CW, that you are the villain. Do I have that right? You're the villain.
Yes.
You're an actress, and you play the role of the villain. And what's the villain's title or name? What are you?
Oh, her name is Nixley. I am the most powerful being in the fifth dimension.
Okay, well, that is amazing. Here's what I know about all stepmothers. None of them want to be villains.
Right.
So I'm curious, you've brought up rejection a couple of times. What are you doing to try to navigate that and not be the villain in their eyes?
I think the main thing is communication. You know, if there was an overall arching statement I would make about what we gained from the Kelly Wersler Masterclass, what we gained from the chapters of your book that we looked at, it would be the human condition, grief, loss, joy, commitment, love, loss again, all of the things that you walk through as a person on the earth. It's very, like, it's common to us all, but it's also very unique in the way that you experience it as an individual. And so there's a way to connect with that because it's common to us all, but there's a way to articulate it that becomes very valuable because the articulation of your process and your grief and your loss and your redemption and your recovery facilitates the expression of who you are as a human being.
And you move toward them in that expression of who you are. Yeah.
Yeah. And so for me, I think that's an area of strength that I have. And I know that that's something that I feel like that's why the mining for conflict and for me coming through kind of the glass wall of like, I don't want to be the villain, or I don't want to upset them, or I don't want to hurt them with I can see that my presence hurts them, which is very painful because I'm very, I'm an actress. I'm an empath and can feel and all these sorts of things. And so I think the main thing for me was understanding that there's only one way to help the faculty of language as they grow as little girls into young women and adolescents into young women. And the grief that they've been through, the process that they're going through, which is not of their choosing right now as we come into union and family-ness, all needs to be articulated. It all needs to be given language. And so for me, there's been some really awkward conversations where, I've just tried to mine for and give voice to and help them articulate how they feel.
That's so good. What I really love about this for our listener is you're moving toward them where they are. And I think there's just so much wisdom in that. Jamie, Marion, I'm curious, how are you guys moving toward one another's kids? Before the wedding, since the wedding?
It was kind of interesting for me because Marion's oldest was looking for an internship and couldn't find anything. And I'm getting ready to go off to Vermont where we were getting married to stay with my parents and help work on the property and stuff like that. And I was like, okay, well, let me see if I can find him an internship where I'm going to be. So I was able to find him an internship there. And so her oldest was going with me to Vermont, and he was going to be there, 2-3 weeks before you got there?
Yes.
Yeah. And so it was going to be just Luke and I at that point going to my parents' house and getting set up and everything. And then I was really kind of shocked that her middle son, Jacob, decided that he wanted to come along too. And so that definitely felt like a win for me, just having both of them being okay with, moving in that direction and both, wanting to be there. And we had a great trip there and everything. So
good for you, man. Yeah. Sounds like you were orchestrating some time together and doing something on their behalf, and that really paid off. How about you, Marion?
I think for me, it's just, finding common ground on things that they want to do and just support it. Feed them, of course, because food is always like a good way into somebody's heart, so
especially teenagers.
Oh yes. So we have a lot of food adventures. Tell them
about Khalil's birthday.
So yeah, just getting creative into what they like. I think Khalil, his oldest, has been one, not been hard to warm up, but he's just very quiet, timid, and it's taken some time. But like I said, it started with just finding common ground. I love cars, so he would, be watching something or, making all his favorite or different kinds of food. Around his birthday last year, I made 6 or 8 different bacon recipes, and he really enjoyed that. So just, finding ways to connect when they need stuff or they bring something that they're interested in.
I just realized I made a mistake, Marion. I left the bacon chapter out of the book.
You did.
Man, what was I thinking? That's always the right answer, bacon.
Yes.
Hey, guys, so I want to ask all 4 of you just for a real quick response to one last question, and it's just this. Based on where you've been, what you've experienced so far, what you've learned, maybe a word of advice from somebody along the way, or maybe it was something you picked up out of preparing to blend. What's the one important piece of advice you would want to give them? We've been talking today about my new book for engaged couples, Preparing to Blend. I'm Ron Deal, and this is Family Life Blended. We're going to get back to their advice in just a minute. Remember to send us your topic ideas and questions. You can submit those to us now and influence the kind of things that we talk about on this podcast. Do that by just sending us an email, blendedquestions@familylife.com. The show notes will give you that email address. Let us know what you need, and we'll do our best to try to meet that need. And another thing, the show notes will link you to our Preparing to Blend webpage with all that bonus material that I talked about at the beginning of the episode. Couples can get a first chapter of the book. You can get another excerpt on planning your wedding and some creative ideas for the wedding ceremony. Leaders and pastors who do premarital counseling, you're going to get, among other things, my free leader's guide. So you can turn Preparing to Blend into 10 premarital counseling sessions with couples. Most premarital counseling completely misses the mark in terms of preparing couples for blended family living. So leaders really need to get this free leader's guide. It's all available online and it's all free. The show notes will link you right to it. Okay, do you remember when Jamie said that blended family living is harder than he thought it was going to be? Well, that's not a bad thing. In fact, I can tell you it's a good thing. I mean, the bottom line is once you understand how to prevent problems and you begin to understand the dynamics of your home better, it's going to result in better relationships, more harmony in your couple relationship and with children as well. I mean, that is why you got married, right? To have that sort of family harmony. So really what you need to do is just learn more about step family living. And that's one of the things we try to do through this podcast, through our books and devotionals. We have online courses now and more that are following in the future. Getting smart about step family living is what it's really all about. The smarter you walk with the Lord and with each other, the stronger your family will be. If you haven't subscribed to this podcast, you certainly can do that. We would love for you to. You can do that through the FamilyLife app, or you can listen on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. Just search FamilyLife Blended. Okay, let's get back to that practical advice from our guests.
I don't know if this was something that I gained from somewhere other than just my experience, but that it's fluid and it's going to change and it's going to ebb and it's going to flow. Even now, as we speak, I was talking about the neat experience with Miriam's oldest boys, getting to connect with them and going on a cross-country road trip, because we drove. But now things have been difficult since we got married, things have been difficult between her oldest and I. And moving all these people into one household has been more challenging than we've anticipated. So just know that it's not going to always be easy. It's not going to always be hard. There's going to be good and bad, and you've got to kind of move with the punches and just know that you're not going to stay in one spot forever.
That's good.
Wow, that's really good.
Yeah, I would just say I've learned over time the most important thing I can do is make sure that I'm choosing the right person that I can trust, because if I can, then everything else will, like Jamie said, it's going to ebb and flow. And as it ebbs and flows, if I can trust Peta as my partner, that she cares about me, that she cares about the girls, and I can really honestly let go of outcomes and let go of having to control certain situations. Because I think that for me, that was the one thing I was just, as a dad of 4 girls, like just trying to protect and guard and this and that. And really, I don't think it was based on a lack of trust of Peta. It was learning to trust in a way that just lets go. And because if we're okay, everything else is going to be okay. By the way, these are all teenagers that we have that are teenagers, so they're unpredictable already.
Right.
Like
by definition,
half the time we're blaming grief, and it's like, no, they're teenagers. It's like it's not nothing to do with grief. It's just they're teenagers. So even that's been probably.
Every day I'm like, I need to call my mom and apologize.
Yes, we all do that. Good word, Jonathan. Yeah, it's good. Couple-ness does not equal family-ness, but let me tell you something. Couple-ness is at the heart of family-ness. You can't have family-ness without what Jonathan just said. Without a covenant, without trust, without solidarity, without commitment. Because when things ebb and flow, like Jamie said, you've got to hold on to each other. Like, we got to be the team that leads this family unit through this process, this transition of becoming a family to one another. And at the end of the day, if you and I are not together, we can't trust each other, we're not one, then there's no way we're going to facilitate oneness among everybody else. So yes, absolutely, coupleness is at the heart of this family journey. Guys, I appreciate you being with me today. Thanks for sharing from your life, your experience, and for letting others just get a little glimpse in and help them think about their journey as well.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. Thank you, Jamie and Marianne. It was so nice to meet you.
Thank you guys as well.
Good to meet
Thank
you
you, Ron.
guys.
And
Thank you.
Yeah, Ron, thanks for what you do. It's awesome.
Yes.
Next time, we're going to hear from Dr. Mary Jepson about conflict and cooperation in co-parenting.
In situations where moms and dads continue to fight, at least openly in front of the children, I'm not sure that the children ever feel or get a sense of safety in either home.
That's co-parenting expert Dr. Mary Jepson next time on Family Life Blended. I'm Ron Deal. Thanks for listening. And thanks to our monthly donors who make this podcast possible. If you'd like to help or say thank you for what the podcast offers you, just look in the show notes for a link. Believe me, every dollar makes a big difference, and I really appreciate it. Our producer is Marcus Holt. Our mastering engineer, Dennis Leak. Project coordinator, Ann Caro. And theme music composed and performed by Braden Deal. Family Life Blended is part of the Family Life Podcast Network, helping you pursue the relationships that matter most.